Chapter 3. Hours later, the sense of her previous justification had worn off. The mug of hot chocolate sat untouched before her. Claire stared at it, unwilling to pick it up, unable to push it away. Its contents had long gone cold. It had coagulated, like old blood. Like old blood from a head wound. The kitchen seemed too bright, too normal. Claire looked at the wooden table, the faded curtains, the kettle with limescale on its spout. Everything looked as it had just a day or so ago. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed. Her hand trembled. The movement fascinated her, like watching someone else's body from a distance. Was this really her hand? She felt disconnected, as though the person who had struck Cockwombledok, who had watched him bleed, who had let him walk away damaged beyond repair, was someone else entirely. Claire's throat tried to close. She swallowed repeatedly, but couldn't dislodge the tightness there. He was dead, the consultant was dead, and someone else was in prison for it. Claire pressed her fingertips into her scalp, digging in with her nails until it hurt, but the pain provided no relief from the thoughts circling inside her head. They'd murdered him. Not by design, but dead is dead. He had walked into her house alive, and now he was dead. The walls of the kitchen moved in on her. She forced herself to breathe, counting the seconds between inhale and exhale. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. He had come to her house to rape her. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. She had defended herself. The overpowering need to run away battled with the knowledge that no matter where she was, the truth would follow her, cling to her forever. She could never outrun what they had done. Claire raised her head to stare at the wall. She tried to summon guilt for his death, for taking a life. But instead, her mind filled with images of his face as he'd forced his way into her home, his weight on top of her, his hands pushing her down. No, she couldn't feel guilty for defending herself. But the man in prison, that was very different. That did send an icy shaft of guilt through her. Someone innocent was locked away, his life derailed, his reputation destroyed, for something she had done. Silence pressed in. Michelle had stepped out to take a call, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. The clock on the wall ticked. She fixed her eyes on its second hand, tracking its movement around the clock face. Time continued to pass, indifferent to the chaos inside her. What would happen now? Would the truth ever be revealed? Probably not. The police seemed satisfied with their arrest. The case was closed. Justice served, except it wasn't. Claire stood up, then immediately sat back down, her legs unable to support her. The room tilted, and she gripped the edge of the table, fighting a wave of dizziness. Was this how it would be now? This constant fear, this persistent dread that someone would discover what they'd done, that someone would see through their lies, that an innocent man's life, ruined because of her, would always weigh her down. Her mother, who never told the truth, had preached that truth will out. The lesson was still burnt on her brain. If only the pressure in her head would subside. The doctor was dead. She couldn't undo that, wouldn't want to undo that. But the innocent man, surely there would be a way to help him, without revealing their own guilt, without destroying their own lives. She reached for the mug. The chocolate inside looked disgusting. Like her thoughts, like her conscience, no longer smooth and palatable, but thick and ugly with conflict. One action had led to another and another, a cascade of consequences she hadn't foreseen. She'd never imagined herself capable of violence, of causing death, of remaining silent while an innocent suffered. She wasn't convinced she actually was capable of the last thing. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke through her spiraling thoughts. Shell. Claire straightened up, trying to compose her face into something that resembled normal. But what was normal now? What could ever be normal again? She looked toward the doorway, waiting for Michelle to appear. Her friend who had beaten a man to death. Her friend who seemed untroubled by the wrongful arrest. Her friend who believed they had already paid their dues, that their own suffering justified what had happened. Claire's breath caught. Had they? Had they truly paid in advance for taking a life? For letting someone else take the blame? The only thing she knew for sure was that there was no undoing what had been done, and she would carry this forever. This moment had marked her, changed her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. There was only before and after now, the Claire who existed until 2 days ago, and the Claire who must exist from this point forward. Michelle's footsteps stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. Claire noticed how she hesitated before she pulled back her shoulders and stepped into the room. She waited. "It's done," Shell said. She moved to the counter, keeping her back to Claire while she filled the kettle. The domestic gesture felt incongruous against the weight of what hung between them. "What's done?" Claire managed. Michelle put the kettle down with unusual precision. She flicked its switch on. "I've spoken to my father. He'll take care of the man they arrested." Claire watched her friend's profile, the tight line of her jaw, the patch of red on the cheekbone she could see. The Michelle she knew had never mentioned her father, except in dismissive fragments that Claire had never had the nerve to question. "Your father?" she repeated. "But you never." "No, I don't," Michelle snapped. "I never mention him, but here we are." The kettle began to rumble. Michelle stood with her back against the counter, arms folded across her chest, eyes fixed on some middle distance that Claire couldn't access. Her posture was rigid. Claire was suddenly terrified that her friend was about to splinter into irreparable shards of glass. "He still has connections with certain people," Michelle continued, her tone clinical. "The police commissioner owes him. Always has. Always will." She vigorously scratched her ear. "The man they arrested will be released tomorrow. Lab mistake. New evidence." Claire stared at her friend. The words made sense individually, but strung together they seemed impossible. "Just like that? Just like that?" Michelle's knuckles whitened where they gripped her own arms. "Except that nothing in this world happens just like that. There's always a price." The kettle clicked off. Michelle turned to pour water into the mugs. "What price?" Claire asked, suddenly terrified of the answer. "What's the price?" For the first time since entering the kitchen, Shell met Claire's gaze directly. Her look was raw and terrible. "My pride," she said finally. Her voice was steady but thin. "My carefully constructed independence." She resumed pouring, steam rising between them. "The illusion that I'd escaped him." Claire's breath hiccuped. This wasn't the confident Michelle who brushed off trauma with dark humor. This was someone else, a Michelle Claire had glimpsed only in fleeting moments throughout their decades of friendship, and never questioned. "Shell," she began, but didn't know how to go on. Michelle placed a mug in front of Claire. "Make no mistake, I didn't do it for him. I did it for you." "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say." Michelle took her own mug and sat across from Claire. Her posture remained unnaturally straight. "I made a call. My father gets the satisfaction of being needed, despite his abuse of me as a child. The innocent man gets his life back. You get to sleep at night. Clean transaction." It wasn't clean. Claire could see that in the controlled way Michelle raised her mug, in how she avoided Claire's gaze, in the slight tremor of her fingers that she failed to hide. "What did he say to you?" Claire asked. Michelle's expression didn't change, but something passed behind her eyes, a drift of pain. "Nothing I haven't heard before. Nothing I can't survive." Outside, rain began to patter against the window, gentle at first, then harder. Claire felt herself split between relief about the wrongfully accused man being set free and concern for what Michelle had sacrificed. "I know what you did cost you," Claire said. Michelle's gaze shifted to the window. "Do you?" There was no accusation in her tone, only genuine question. "My father has wanted me to ask for his help for years. It confirms everything he believes, that I can't manage without him, that my independence is performance, that I am fundamentally broken without his intervention." She sat across the table from Claire, with perfect posture, a face carved from granite, holding herself together through sheer force of will. This woman, who had beaten a man to death to protect her, who had called the father she never spoke of, to save a stranger, again for her. She carried herself as if nothing touched her, while everything did. "I would have found another way," Claire whispered. Michelle's smile held no warmth. "No, you wouldn't. You were coming apart. You were broken, and I couldn't stand to see it." She put her mug down with deliberate care. "Sometimes the only way through is to use the tools at hand, no matter how much you hate them." The rain intensified, battering the glass. Claire felt the shift between them, something fundamental changing in the fabric of their friendship. Michelle had revealed a vulnerability she'd kept hidden for decades, not through confession, but through her action to protect Claire. "What happens now?" Now we go on. We carry this together. Michelle extended her hand across the table. Palm up. We carry each other. Claire placed her hand in Michelle's. Both hands were cold. Cold, but tightly interlocked. The hospital corridor hadn't changed when Claire went to work. Same flickering fluorescent lights, same cracked tiles around the fire exit, same mottled health posters with their curling corners. Claire's footsteps made the same hollow sound they always had. It was shocking the way the world had simply kept turning. Her swipe card still worked. The doors still hissed open. There were no alarms, no red lights, no security guards thundering towards her to manhandle her to the manager's office for a crime no one knew she'd committed. There was just the usual mechanical thrum of hospital life carrying on, the same astringent smell, the complete indifference to her existence, as if she hadn't spent the last few days sweating through nightmares and wondering how close she'd come to unraveling completely. Claire walked the corridor slowly, half expecting something to feel different. But it didn't. The building didn't know what she'd done. The walls didn't whisper. The lights didn't shut down in disapproval. Only she had changed. Her body moved through the space differently. Shoulders tight, breath shallow, each step an effort of will. She caught herself watching her own legs move as if from above, detached from the mechanics of walking. At the nursing station, Diane laughed at something on her phone. The same barking laugh she'd always had. Down the hall, someone pushed a squeaking cart. A junior doctor stifled a yawn as he passed her. Nobody looked at her twice. Claire pressed her hand against the wall, steadying herself. Her palm registered the texture of the paint. Slightly rough, institutional. She'd never noticed it before. She entered the break room, where the refrigerator hummed its familiar complaint. She kept her eyes down, hanging her coat carefully, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Her movements felt overly precise, like performing a role she'd rehearsed but never mastered. "Morning," someone said. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. She filled the kettle, watching water rise in the transparent window. Her hand trembled slightly, and she gripped the handle tighter to compensate. Behind her, voices gathered around the small table. She caught fragments as she fixed her tea, stirring it for too long, the spoon clinking rhythmically against ceramic. "Can't believe they just let him go." "Lab error, that's what they're saying." Typical, though, isn't it? Claire focused on her breathing. In, out. 4 counts each. The way Shell had taught her after panic attacks at university. Poor bastard spent 4 days inside for nothing. Nasty business, the whole thing. The tea burned her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It anchored her to the present moment, this ordinary room where nothing had changed except herself. She slipped into a chair at the edge of the group, not participating but not obviously avoiding them either. Someone had brought pastries. Claire took one without seeing it, felt crumbs fall onto her blouse. She brushed them away with exaggerated care, counting each movement. Heard he's suing the police. It'll never stick, though. The room seemed suddenly too bright, colours sharpening until they hurt her eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than they should. Claire blinked rapidly, feeling sweat gather at her hairline. "You all right?" Angela asked from across the table. "You look a bit peaky." Claire managed something resembling a smile. "Fine, thanks. Just a bit of a headache." The lie emerged naturally. She watched herself deliver it with a perfect mix of casual dismissal and grateful acknowledgement. When had she learned to lie so convincingly? Someone mentioned the consultant, using his name rather than Claire's private epithet. The sound of it sent a jolt through her body. The tea sloshed in her cup, and then replacement starting Thursday. Mercer, God help us. Out of the frying pan. Claire's throat closed. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. Nobody seemed to notice her reaction. They continued talking, voices washing over her while she excused herself. In the bathroom, Claire stared at her reflection. It looked the same to her as it always had, except that something had shifted behind her eyes. Something hard and watchful that hadn't been there before. She ran cold water over her wrists, an old trick for calming her racing pulse. Her body felt simultaneously too solid and not quite real. A contradiction that added to the sensation of her not really being there at all. A toilet flushed in one of the stalls. Claire straightened, quickly recomposing her expression. A nurse emerged, barely glancing at her while washing hands. She was just another invisible fixture in the hospital landscape. Back at her desk, Claire arranged her things with meticulous precision. Pens lined up, sticky notes squared off. The familiar ritual offered no comfort today. Her fingers lingered on the edge of her keyboard, registering its texture with uncomfortable acuity. The department carried on around her. Phones rang, people walked past. Someone laughed too loudly. Each sound registered as if through water, slightly distorted, slightly delayed. She opened the first file and began typing. The words made sense individually, but refused to cohere into meaning. Her fingers moved automatically, transcribing medical terminology she'd processed 1,000 times before. This was her life. This ordinary office. These ordinary people. It all went on exactly as before. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, colleagues chatting. Only she no longer belonged to the before. She looked around at the institutional beige walls, the utilitarian furniture, the faces of colleagues who had no idea what she'd done, what she was capable of. The same world that had always existed, suddenly rendered strange by her altered perception. And somewhere in the city, a man walked free, trying to reclaim his life after 4 days of incarceration for a crime he didn't commit. While Claire sat here, typing symptoms and diagnoses, pretending to be the person she'd always been. The horror wasn't that everything had changed. The horror was that nothing had. Claire's body had registered Adrian Mercer's name before her mind fully processed it. First came the hollowing in her stomach, then the weightlessness in her limbs, as if her blood had momentarily retreated from her extremities. Mercer, God help us. The fragments of conversation around her had continued, but Claire's hearing tunneled, voices becoming distant and indistinct, while those 2 syllables, Mercer, echoed with perfect clarity. She forced herself not to bash the keys too hard. She was a touch typist and didn't need to hit the keyboard, only to let her fingers flow over it. The concentration required helped to anchor herself as, crazily, the floor seemed to keep tilting. Adrian Mercer, the consultant who'd been moved from orthopedics after the 3rd complaint was buried, the one whose secretary had requested transfer twice before, simply not returning after a holiday, the one whose name travelled through departments in hushed warnings between women. That Adrian Mercer. Worse than the last one, if that's even possible. Claire's tongue felt wooden in her mouth. She reached for her mug, her hand moving with careful precision. No trembling, no spilling, nothing to draw attention, nothing to reveal the violent storm raging behind her face. The hospital had simply replaced one predator with another. Without hesitation, the system hadn't even bothered to pretend otherwise. Angela stood on the other side of her desk. You know him, Claire? Mercer? Only by reputation. Angela moved on to join the proper secretaries, who were discussing some cancelled surgery in cardio. Claire pretended to be concentrating on her screen. Her focus turned inward as memories flashed unbidden. Helen from records, recounting Mercer's wandering hands during a department evaluation. The whispers about the nursing student who'd left her program rather than file a formal complaint. The smirking half-jokes about which were the best escape strategies. The familiar weight of dread settled in her lower back. Not fear, exactly. Something deeper, colder. Something that had always been there, but now had a crisper edge. Predators would keep coming, one after another. Their faces might change, but their appetites would be the same. No one noticed as she slipped out, making for the women's toilets. Inside, she stood before the sink, avoiding her reflection. The porcelain was cool beneath her palms. She pressed harder, welcoming the discomfort, Mercer. Her throat constricted around an involuntary sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something feral caught between the two. They'd never even interviewed for the position. There hadn't been time. It would have been a call from one old boy to another, a quiet word about a personnel issue, and that perhaps a fresh environment would be beneficial. On the understanding that the problem wasn't the behaviour but the complaint. Mercer would arrive, hang his pristine white coat on the same hook, sit at the same desk, begin the same pattern of escalation. Different target, perhaps. Different methods, maybe. But the same entitlement, the same impunity. A small, incandescent core of rage burned steadily in her chest. She returned to her desk, settled into her chair. The department hummed around her, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, printers whirring. Claire opened her drawer and methodically arranged her supplies again. Pens, sticky notes, stapler, paperclips sorted according to color, everything in its proper place. Her fingers brushed against her phone. She considered texting Michelle. It's happening again, but she stopped herself. This wasn't Shell's problem. This was the problem. The endless cycle. The system that simply replaced one predator with another, expecting the prey to adjust, adapt, accommodate. She glanced at the empty office that would soon belong to Adrian Mercer. Through the glass walls, she could see the bare desk, the vacant chair, a blank slate waiting to be filled. In 2 days, he would swagger through that door, confident in his immunity, secure in the knowledge that the system would protect him as it always had. Claire turned back to her screen, fingers poised over the keyboard. But her mind was elsewhere, calculating, assessing. The hospital's security protocols, cameras, blind spots, night shift rotations, she mapped them all. She began typing, her face a perfect mask of professional competence. No one watching would have noticed anything unusual, just another secretary performing her duties, just another cog in the institutional machine. But something fundamental had shifted. The Claire who had once trembled beneath a desk as unwanted hands invaded her space was gone. In her place sat someone new, someone who understood exactly how the system worked and exactly what needed to be done. She would not be reactive this time. She would not wait for the assault, the violation, the moment of crisis. She already knew what Adrian Mercer was. She already knew what would happen if she did nothing. Her posture was relaxed, her expression neutral. But inside, plans were taking shape, precise, methodical, inevitable. They had replaced one predator with another. She would not allow it. Claire turned her key in the lock, each scrape and click magnified in her ears. The door swung open with that familiar creak, a sound she'd heard thousands of times before, but now registered as foreign, belonging to a different life. She stepped inside, her movements deliberate, each footstep careful, as if the floor might give way beneath her. The hallway stretched before her, unchanged yet distorted, like viewing a familiar photograph through warped glass. The coat stand held the same jackets, the shoe rack, the same footwear. Her keys made the same clinking sound when she dropped them into the ceramic hedgehog on the side for that purpose. She stood vacantly for a moment. She was not just tired, she was hollowed out. Finally, she moved. In the kitchen, Michelle stood at the counter, slicing vegetables with methodical precision. She didn't look up immediately when Claire entered. "There'll be soup soon," she said, nodding toward the stove where a pot simmered. Her voice was flat. Claire sank into a chair at the table. "Not hungry," she said. Michelle paused her chopping. "You need to eat." Claire traced a finger along a dark line that ran through the pale oak. How many times had she sat at this table? How many meals, conversations, arguments had they had here? In the before times. "They're bringing in a replacement for him," she said. "For who?" "For Cock-Wombledok." Michelle turned to face her. "You look terrible," she said. "His name is Adrian Mercer," Claire continued. "He's known for harassing women, multiple complaints buried, multiple secretaries transferred. They've replaced one predator with another. Institutions protect their own." "Is that all you have to say?" Claire asked. "What would you like me to say? That it's unexpected? It's not. That it's unfair? Of course it is." Claire pushed herself to stand, but her legs trembled, and she had to cling on to the table. "I kept thinking today that nothing had changed," she said. "The hospital still smells the same. People laugh at the same jokes. The lights still flicker in the corridors." She turned to face Michelle. "But I've changed. I feel it inside me. Something strange, something hard and cold." Michelle studied Claire with her usual clinical detachment. "Of course you've changed," she said. "You crossed a line. We both did." She returned to her vegetables, sliding them into a bowl with the flat of the knife. "Of course the hospital is the same. The world doesn't care if we change." Claire watched her friend's efficient movements. No wasted motion. Michelle had always moved through life like this, conserving energy, revealing nothing. "How do you do it?" Claire asked. "How do you just carry on the same?" Michelle placed the knife in the sink. "By understanding that survival requires adaptation. By recognizing that guilt is a luxury." She turned, meeting Claire's gaze. "By accepting that the world is what it is, not what we wish it to be." "When he comes, this new consultant," Claire began. "You'll do what needs to be done," Michelle interrupted. She wiped her hands on a towel. That's what surviving looks like. Claire thought of the empty office waiting for Adrian Mercer. This predator would arrive on Thursday, confident that he was untouchable. Yes, she said. I will do what needs to be done. Something in her tone caught Michelle's attention. Claire, she said, whatever you're thinking, be careful. I'm always careful. For the first time, Michelle smiled. No, you're not. Claire wanted to smile back, but couldn't. Michelle was right. She wasn't always as careful as she needed to be. Just don't do anything stupid then, Michelle said. I won't. She nodded. Then I'll back you. We are in this together, as we've always been. Claire looked down at her hands. They were steady now, but they had often trembled when she'd been in the office. These same hands had gripped the bronze hair and used it to deadly effect. They had typed up medical notes today with mechanical efficiency, betraying nothing of what else they had done. These hands could do more. They could act. They could protect, not just herself, but others too. We're in this together, she echoed. She would no longer wait for the next assault. She would act first. We're not blood sisters for nothing.